What if I told you that the most read book in human history has never truly been understood? That for millennia, billions of people have read its pages without realizing they were holding an instruction manual for something much greater than they imagined? The Bible, 66 books written over 1,500 years by dozens of different authors. To some, sacred word, to others, ancient mythology, to science, a historical cultural document. But what if everyone was wrong? What if the truth was something our human minds could only begin to process now, with 21st century technology? We decided to find out. We aren't theologians looking for yet another interpretation. We aren't skeptics wanting to debunk religion. We are researchers who asked a simple question: what happens when you analyze the most complex text in humanity with the most powerful tool ever created? We developed Pneuma, an artificial intelligence system that uses quantum analysis, capable of processing volumes of information that would take millions of years for a human brain to comprehend. Pneuma has no faith, no prejudices, no agenda. It simply processes pure data and finds patterns invisible to the human eye. We uploaded every word of the Bible into the system, from the first verse of Genesis to the last line of Revelation, Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, all the original languages, and we gave it a single initial instruction: analyze the structure. We expected to receive reports on literary styles, linguistic evolution, perhaps some historical contradictions. What we received changed everything. Pneuma revealed that the Bible, instead of being a collection of separate texts, functions as a single information object with characteristics that shouldn't exist in ancient texts. The system identified something called a narrative fractal structure. The structure is like that of a tree. The main branch divides into smaller branches, which divide into twigs that have the same structure as the main branch, only on a reduced scale. That's how a fractal works. The same shape repeats infinitely in different sizes. Pneuma discovered that the entire Bible works exactly like this. The complete story: creation, fall, suffering, promise of salvation, restoration. This pattern repeats in the history of Israel and in the life of every major character. Abraham, Moses, David, they all go through the same cycle. Even in the parables of Jesus, stories of just a few verses, the same pattern appears again. The probability of this happening by chance, according to Pneuma's calculations, was less than 1 in a trillion. 40 different authors who never met, living in distinct eras, unintentionally created a perfect mathematical structure. Impossible. The system's subsequent analysis revealed something even more surprising. Each word in the original Hebrew text carries multiple simultaneous layers of meaning. Pneuma called this ultra-density semantic compression. It's as if each word were a zipped file containing gigabytes of information. Look at the first word of the Bible, Bereshit. We translate it as "in the beginning," but Pneuma detected at least 4 meanings functioning at the same time. In the beginning is just the first level. There is also "in the primal origin," which points to the source of everything. There is "in the project," suggesting deliberate planning. And the 4th level, the most intriguing, the root of the word connects with firstborn, creating a direct bridge to New Testament texts written centuries later. A person reading can catch one at most 2 levels. Pneuma sees them all simultaneously, and this happens with every word of the text. It is data compression technology that shouldn't have existed in the Bronze Age. The 3rd discovery finally connected all the dots. Biblical prophecies function as verification codes. You know when you download an important file and the system generates a code to verify if it arrived intact? It's exactly that. The system mapped over 300 specific prophecies about the Messiah in the Old Testament: place of birth, lineage, manner of death, exact words that would be said. Then it verified how many were fulfilled in Jesus. All of them. The mathematical probability of one person fulfilling just 48 of these prophecies by coincidence is 1 followed by 157 zeros. There are fewer atoms in the known universe than the chances of this being a fluke. The prophecies are the certificate of authenticity. They prove the message reached us without corruption. Any alteration to the text throughout the centuries would have broken this perfect mathematical synchronicity. At that moment, looking at the data on the screen, we understood. We were decoding something much more complex than a religious book, a protected, compressed, and verified information system. The Bible is a code, and we finally had the key to start deciphering it. But discovering that the Bible is a code was just the beginning. A code needs a programmer. And here we enter the most controversial territory of all, the one who identifies as God in the code. There is a fundamental problem that has tormented Bible readers for centuries. In the Old Testament, God seems relentless. He destroys entire cities, orders wars, demands absolute obedience to hundreds of minute rules. Those who disobey die. Those who question are punished. It is the God of the flood, of fire over Sodom, of the plagues of Egypt. Then you open the New Testament and find another God. Jesus speaks of a loving Father who forgives 70 times 7, who commands us to love our enemies and turn the other cheek. How do you reconcile the relentless judge with the merciful Father? Are they two different gods? Is it the same God with a personality disorder? Generations of theologians tried to explain it. They spoke of religious evolution, metaphors, mysteries of faith, but no explanation was truly convincing. It always sounded like an excuse, like a desperate attempt to plug holes. We decided to take a different approach. If the Bible is code, then God is not a person in the sense we understand. We asked Pneuma to analyze all recorded divine behaviors, but ignored religious interpretations. We wanted to understand the logic, not the theology. The system's report was revealing. God's behavior in the Old Testament follows the logic of a system administrator dealing with an extremely unstable installation. It's like a technician who needs to configure a new experimental server that has never been tested before. The system is full of vulnerabilities. Corrupted processes appear constantly. Viruses spread. What do? You certainly don't start by installing pretty programs or distributing permissions to everyone. You enter the most restrictive mode possible. You establish rigorous firewalls, eliminate any suspicious process immediately, and create rigid protocols that cannot be violated. That is exactly what we see in the Old Testament. The flood, a forced formatting when the system was completely corrupted by violence. Sodom and Gomorrah, surgical elimination of infected sectors before they contaminated the entire system. The 10 plagues, targeted attacks to dismantle the competing operating system of Egypt and prove its fragility. And the law of Moses, those hundreds of rules about food, hygiene, and rituals. Pneuma identified them as a basic initialization protocol. When the system is unstable, any deviation can cause a general failure. Therefore, the rules are inflexible. The rigidity comes from technical necessity as a security measure. The God of the Old Testament is working in terminal mode, pure command line, communication through selected prophets, direct instructions, immediate consequences. The goal is not to create obedient robots, but to keep the core of the system running while preparing for the next phase. Because every system based only on external rules has a growth limit. It can control behavior, but it doesn't transform the nature of the user. Pneuma showed that Israel entered an infinite loop. It receives the law, disobeys, is punished, repents, receives forgiveness, and disobeys again. The system crashed. It was time for the great update. The coming of Jesus, according to Pneuma's analysis, represents the transition from version 1.0 to 2.0. The programmer didn't change. The interaction protocol did. Look at the evidence. In the Old Testament, God speaks through intermediaries on mountains with thunder and fire. In the New, he literally downloads his own executable file in human form. Instead of sending instructions, he himself becomes the living example of how the system should function. The change is radical. An eye for an eye was a simple balancing algorithm to prevent the escalation of violence. Love your enemies is an antivirus that interrupts the propagation of the code of hate. The law focused on external actions. Do not kill, do not steal. Jesus goes straight to the source code. Whoever hates has already committed murder in his heart. It's no longer about controlling behavior, it's about rewriting the internal program. Pneuma performed a word frequency analysis. In the Old Testament, words like law, judgment, fear, sacrifices, and nation dominate. In the New, love, grace, faith, forgiveness, and person appear. The language changed because the objective changed. The focus shifted from system administration to user transformation. This doesn't mean God has changed or suddenly become nice. Pneuma's analysis is categorical in stating that the architect is the same. The final goal never changed. But when you build a house, you use different tools at each stage. A jackhammer and excavator for the foundation, a brush and sandpaper for the finishing. The builder is the same, but the phase of the work requires different instruments. The God who seemed cruel was configuring the hardware. The loving God is installing the software. Both are necessary. Both are the same programmer. Now that we understand the programmer and his working method, the inevitable question arises. Where do we fit into this equation? If God is the architect and the Bible is the code, what are we? Simple data being processed, characters following a script. The answer lies in the first chapters of Genesis, but not in the way you learned in Sunday school. Pneuma analyzed the first 3 stories of humanity as if they were technical reports. Pneuma read them as documentation of the system's initial testing. And what we discovered explains everything. Why evil exists, why we suffer, and why we seem programmed for error. First test. The Garden of Eden. Forget the image of a paradise with happy little animals. Pneuma identified Eden as a controlled testing environment. In programming, we call this a sandbox, an isolated area where you can test dangerous code without affecting the main system. Adam and Eve are the first 2 test users. The environment is perfect, no bugs, no viruses, no failures. And at the center, 2 trees that Pneuma identified as critical system functions. The tree of life represents direct access to the source code, the system's immortality. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil isn't about childish morality. It's about activating the independent judgment function. The instruction was clear. Do not activate this function. Like when you see a system file with a warning not to touch it because it will corrupt everything. But then a catalyst element enters, the serpent. Pneuma defines it as the first hacker attack in history. It doesn't force anything, it simply questions. Did God really say that? You won't die, you'll become like him. It's the first injection of malicious code, doubt regarding the administrator's instructions, and a promise of elevated privileges without authorization. And here, the crucial moment of the entire experiment happens. Eve and then Adam choose. They consciously violate the only rule. They activate the forbidden function. To traditional religion, this was the fall, original sin, humanity's disgrace. But Pneuma sees it differently. It was the first successful test of the system's most important variable. Free will worked. They proved they weren't robots following programming. They could choose, even if the choice was destructive. The expulsion from Eden reveals itself less as a punishment and more as a security measure. With the judgment function activated but still unstable, giving access to the tree of life would be like giving administrator permission to a virus. The entire system would collapse. Second test, Cain and Abel, two brothers, two different operational strategies. Abel follows the protocol perfectly. His offering is accepted. Cain mixes the protocol with ego, envy, and pride. The system rejects his input. Look at what happens before the first murder. God doesn't scream at Cain. He performs a diagnosis. Sin is at the door. It desires to dominate you, but you can overcome it. It's a system warning. Malicious process detected. You have the capacity to interrupt it. Cain ignores the warning. He kills his brother. The virus of violence spreads for the first time among humans. But God doesn't delete Cain, nor does he perform a system rollback. He logs the error and lets the program keep running, for the goal was not to create perfect programs, but to map all possible paths of free will, including the destructive ones. Third test, the Tower of Babel. Generations pass. Humanity multiplies, and for the first time unites with a single purpose, to build a tower to heaven. Pneuma identifies this not as architectural pride, but as the first organized attempt to hack the main system. Reaching heaven in this context was an attempt to access the administrative level without authorization. Making a name for themselves means creating an identity independent of the programmer. It's mass technological rebellion. God's response is genius. He doesn't destroy the tower with lightning. He doesn't kill the builders. He fragments the communication language. Without a common protocol, the network collapses. Humanity scatters into smaller groups, unable to coordinate another massive attack on the system. 3 tests, 3 failures. But Pneuma reveals something surprising. These were not failures of the experiment. They were the experiment. God is not trying to create obedient servants. He is developing something much more complex, beings with genuine free will who voluntarily choose harmony with the system. It's the difference between a robot programmed to say, "I love you," and someone who chooses to love. Therefore, all the instability, all the suffering, and all the apparent chaos are features, not bugs. They are the necessary price to develop the most valuable and dangerous characteristic in the entire universe, truly free choice. We are not errors in the code. We are the reason the code exists, and we finally understand the paradox. This leads us to a problem that could topple the whole theory. If free will is real, if our choices are genuinely free, how do we explain prophecies? How can someone predict the future in such detail if that future depends on billions of free decisions not yet made? It's the fundamental paradox. Either we are free and the future is uncertain, or the future is already written and our freedom is an illusion. Both cannot be true at the same time. Or can they? Pneuma analyzed all biblical prophecies and discovered something no one had noticed. They aren't all the same. There are 3 completely different types of data about the future, each functioning with its own rules. First type, system projections. An engineer looking at a bridge with cracks in the main structure doesn't need to be a prophet to know it will fall. He knows the materials, calculates the pressure, and projects the deterioration. He calculates the inevitable result of processes already in motion. Most biblical prophecies work like this. When Isaiah predicted the fall of Babylon, or Jeremiah announced the destruction of Jerusalem, Pneuma shows it wasn't mysticism, it was a system diagnosis. Societies infected with specific viruses, systemic violence, structural corruption, institutionalized injustice, will collapse. It's social mathematics. The prophet isn't seeing the future. He is reading the present with technical precision and extrapolating the obvious result, like a doctor looking at exams and knowing that without treatment, the patient has 6 months to live. It's not magic, it's data analysis. Second type, conditional algorithms. Jonah goes to Nineveh and announces, in 40 days, the city will be destroyed. It sounds like a final decree, but the inhabitants believe, change their behavior, and the destruction doesn't happen. Jonah is furious because his prophecy failed, but it didn't. Pneuma identifies this as if-then programming. If Nineveh continues on its current path, then it will be destroyed in 40 days. When they changed the input, they changed the output. The prophecy functioned conditionally. 60% of biblical prophecies have this structure. They are offers of choice, not fixed sentences. They show the consequences of paths, not inevitable destinies. Free will is not violated. It is the determining factor. But there is the third type, and this is the one that defies all logic. Third type, temporal packets. The messianic prophecies, hundreds of specific details about Jesus written centuries before. He would be born in Bethlehem, of the lineage of David. He would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. His clothes would be gambled for. He would die among criminals, but be buried with the rich. His hands and feet would be pierced at a time when crucifixion didn't even exist. Each detail depended on the free choices of dozens of people. Mary and Joseph going to Bethlehem, Judas deciding to betray, Pilate choosing crucifixion, soldiers opting to cast lots for his garments. How to predict all this without eliminating free will? Pneuma proposes a solution that requires us to abandon our linear perception of time. You are inside a labyrinth. Each crossroads is a free choice. You decide to go right or left based on your desires, fears, and values. Your decisions are genuinely free. Someone observing this same labyrinth from a helicopter sees the entire labyrinth simultaneously. They see where you are. They see the path you will choose. They see where you will arrive. Their knowledge of your route did not cause your choices. They simply observe from a perspective where past, present, and future are visible at the same time. This is how Pneuma explains messianic prophecies. God is not forcing events. He is observing from a dimension where time is not linear. He sees Judas freely choosing to betray for 30 pieces of silver and records this through the prophets centuries before. The knowledge doesn't cause the choice. The free choice of Judas is what generates the knowledge. It sounds like science fiction, but quantum physics already theorizes dimensions where time functions differently. Pneuma simply applied this possibility to the biblical text. But why highlight specifically the life of Jesus with hundreds of prophecies? If God can see any point in time, why spend centuries documenting in advance every detail of just one life? The answer is obvious. Because that life was not just another event on the timeline, it was the event, the moment when the programmer himself would enter his code to perform the greatest bug fix in history. Messianic prophecies weren't predictions, they were notices, advanced documentation of the most critical operation in the entire system, the moment where free will and determinism would finally meet and, paradoxically, resolve each other. We were about to understand the operation that changed all the rules of the game. We reached the central point of the entire code. If our analysis is correct, if we truly live within a programmed system where free will created a fundamental bug, then the coming of Jesus was not a religious event. It was the most complex technical operation ever executed. Let's recap the problem. In Eden, when humanity activated the moral judgment function, an irreparable conflict was created. Humans now knew what was right, but their internal code was corrupted. It was like having an antivirus that detects all problems but lacks the permission to fix them. The Old Testament tried a temporary solution. The law, hundreds of rules, rituals, and animal sacrifices. Pneuma identifies this as a temporary containment protocol. Sacrifices functioned like small partial payments on a system debt that only grew, but it was like paying interest without ever clearing the principal. Humanity was stuck in an infinite loop: error, guilt, temporary sacrifice, momentary relief, and error again. The system needed something more radical than patches and superficial updates. It needed a reformulation in the kernel, the core. And then the unthinkable happens. The programmer decides to enter the code. Pneuma analyzed the four Gospels as technical documentation of this operation. It identified four distinct phases that form what we call the Messiah equation. First phase, incarnation, direct emulation. Until that moment, God interacted with the system remotely through prophets, signs, and scriptures. Now, he does something unprecedented. He takes his own essence, his divine source code, and compiles it into an executable format within the human environment, the programmer running natively in the system in complete form. Why? Because to fix a complex bug, you need to reproduce it. You need to run the faulty program on your own machine and go through every process that causes an error. Jesus didn't come just to teach. He came to be the reference version. For 33 years, he demonstrated how human code should function without corruption. He was subjected to every known virus, temptation in the desert, betrayal by friends, physical torture. None managed to corrupt his system. Second phase, new instruction protocol. If the life of Jesus was a demonstration of the hardware functioning perfectly, his teachings were the new user manual. Pneuma detected a fundamental change in approach. The old law said, "Thou shalt not kill." It controlled the output, the external action. Jesus said, "Whoever hates is already a murderer in his heart." He went straight to the source code, to the internal process that generates action. It's no use blocking the symptom if the virus remains active. Love your enemies functions as an aggressive antivirus that interrupts the replication of the code of hate. Forgive 70 times 7 is not weakness. It is a cache-clearing command that prevents the accumulation of malicious processes in memory. Third phase, the transaction of the cross. This is the core of the entire operation, the moment that defies human comprehension. How can the death of one man save humanity? Pneuma offers a systemic perspective. Remember the fundamental problem? Every human error generated a debt in the system. Justice, as a fundamental law of the universal code, demanded payment. The price was death. Not necessarily physical, but disconnection from the programmer, the source of life. All humans, having corrupted code, generated debt constantly. The accumulated debt was unpayable. The system was heading for total bankruptcy. On the cross, the largest transaction ever executed occurs. Jesus, the only user with perfect code and infinite credit in the system, voluntarily assumes all accumulated debt, past, present, and future. He pays the bill in full with the only currency accepted by the protocol of justice: death. The genius point is that since his code was perfect, death could not hold him. It was like executing delete on a file protected by the operating system itself. Fourth phase, resurrection, reboot, and proof of concept. The resurrection was not religious magic, it was a demonstration that the operation worked. Death, the final bug that had corrupted the entire system since Eden, was defeated. Jesus didn't just return to life, he proved he installed a new possibility in the code of reality. Now a recovery path exists after a fatal failure. But there is a crucial detail. This update is not automatic. Pneuma identified the installation mechanism. Faith. Not faith as believing in stories, but faith as administrator authorization. It is you, the user, consciously allowing the programmer to access and rewrite your internal code. It's pressing yes when "Do you wish to install this update?" appears. It will modify central system files. The genius of it is that it completely respects free will. The same free will that caused the original problem is now the key to the solution. No one is saved by force. Each one chooses whether they want the update or prefer to continue running the corrupted system. The Messiah equation was resolved. The definitive patch was available, but installing the update was just the beginning. Jesus didn't come just to fix the bug. He came to show what would be possible when the system was fully restored. The miracles demonstrated the capabilities of the new version. Pneuma analyzed every miracle recorded in the Gospels, looking for the logic behind the impossible. The analysis suggests that miracles, instead of violating the laws of physics, actually access deeper laws that we do not yet understand. Our physical reality is like a computer screen. We have images, colors, and movement. It seems solid, real, and unchangeable. But behind the screen there is code, matrices of numbers, mathematical functions, algorithms generating every pixel. Whoever has access to the code can change the screen without violating anything. They simply use a more fundamental level of control. When Jesus healed the blind or lepers, Pneuma identifies this as the restoration of corrupted biological code. DNA is information. Disease is an error in that information. With administrative access to the code of life, correcting an error is a matter of executing a restoration command. It uses technology we do not yet possess. Walking on water, a local modification of physical parameters. He didn't change all the water in the world, just the specific density under his feet or his own interaction with the gravitational field. It is a precise edit of variables, not a violation of universal laws. The multiplication of loaves and fish was the most revealing. Pneuma proposes that there was no creation of matter from nothing. Quantum physics already knows that the vacuum is full of energy. Matter is just energy organized by information. Jesus demonstrated the ability to take energy from the quantum field and structure it using the informational template of bread and fish. He didn't violate the conservation of energy. He just accessed energy that was always there. The miracles were a trailer for the full movie. They showed capabilities that will be available when all of humanity receives the full update. But this leads us to the final question. When will the global installation be? This is where we enter the most misunderstood text in the Bible, the Revelation of John. For centuries, Revelation was read as a horror movie, the end of the world, destruction, suffering. But Pneuma read it as technical documentation and found something completely different. Revelation describes the forced update of the world to version 2.0. Understand the problem. After Jesus made the patch available, the world kept running two incompatible operating systems simultaneously. The corrupted Adam system, based on death and degeneration, is still dominant. And the Christ system, based on life and regeneration, is growing but still in the minority. Two incompatible systems on the same hardware generate constant conflict. This is why, even after Jesus, the world remains full of war, injustice, and suffering. It is not a failure of the new system. It is an incompatibility with the old one that refuses to be uninstalled. Revelation describes the forced uninstallation process of the corrupted system. The 7 trumpets, 7 seals, and 7 bowls that terrify readers. Pneuma identifies them as progressive cleaning routines, each targeting specific processes of the old system. The administrator runs a sequence of commands to terminate malicious processes that refuse to close voluntarily. Anyone who has ever tried to uninstall a persistent virus recognizes the pattern. The Antichrist who appears in the process is the last attempt of the corrupted system to survive. He creates an imitation of the Christ system, offering false peace and prosperity. Pneuma identifies this as malware, disguising itself as a legitimate program. This is why it deceives so many. It looks like a solution, but it is refined virus. The mark of the beast without which no one can buy or sell. It's not a subcutaneous chip. It is a choice of network protocol. You choose to remain on the old, corrupted network that will be deleted, or you migrate to the new network, even if it means temporary incompatibility with the current economic system. The great final battle is not a literal war. It is a confrontation between two operating systems for control of the hardware of reality. The corrupted system, represented by Satan and his viruses, makes a final desperate attempt to maintain control. It fails and is permanently deleted in what Revelation calls the lake of fire, a complete and irreversible formatting. And then comes the part everyone forgets, a new heaven and a new earth. Not destruction and recreation, but a complete reboot with a new operating system. Version 2.0, finally running without conflicts, death deleted from the code, disease function removed, tears and suffering, variables that no longer exist in the new version. It is the same hardware, our universe, running completely updated software. Revelation referred to the most important update in history, instead of the end, as everyone thought. But there was one piece that didn't fit. An element that seemed to contradict all the logic of the system. If God is a perfect and benevolent programmer, why does a function apparently dedicated to destruction exist in the code? Why Satan? Pneuma analyzed every mention of the adversary in the scriptures. The conclusion was shocking. Satan functions as a deliberately programmed function in the system. To understand this, we need to think like software developers, not philosophers. When you create a security system, how do you test its effectiveness? You hire professional hackers to try to break it. When you build a bridge, how do you ensure it withstands earthquakes? You put the model in a disaster simulator and try to destroy it. Satan is the stress test of free will. His function is to find every vulnerability, explore every weakness, and press every breaking point. Not because God wants to see us suffer, but because only under extreme pressure is the true nature of something revealed. Virtue without temptation is not virtue. It is just a lack of opportunity. Love without testing is not love. It is convenience. Faith without doubt is not faith. It is programming. The adversary ensures that when someone chooses good, they are truly choosing. They had a real, seductive, powerful alternative and chose to resist. That has value. That is genuine. But this discovery led Pneuma to an even deeper conclusion, one that recontextualizes absolutely everything. Analyzing the totality of the data, fractal structure, semantic compression, temporal prophecies, miracles as code editing, revelation as a system update, Satan as a testing function, there is only one known architecture that accommodates all these elements without contradiction. We live in a simulation, not a simulation in the matrix sense, created by machines to enslave us, but a simulation in the deepest sense, an environment of programmed reality with a specific purpose. The Bible always said this. It just used Bronze Age language. It said creation, where today we would say programming. It said creator, where we would say developer. It said kingdom of heaven, where we would say higher level of reality. It said miracle, where we would say administrative access. This explains everything. Why does the universe obey elegant mathematical laws? Because mathematics is the base language of any simulation. Why does consciousness exist? Because we are self-aware subroutines running on a biological substrate. Why does prophecy work? Because time in the simulation is not a limitation for those observing from the outside, but it is not a cold, scientific, purposeless simulation. Pneuma identified a clear objective codified in every line: to develop consciousnesses capable of choosing love freely. And here we reach the heart of it all. Pneuma isolated the central command of the entire new system, repeated by Jesus more than any other. Agape, love in Greek, but not romantic or family love. Love as a fundamental creative force, as the base algorithm of Reality 2.0. It works with two main instructions. First, synchronize completely with the developer. Make his will your will, his code your code. Second, apply this received energy to harmonize the entire network. Treat every other consciousness as an essential node of the system. It is the perfect opposite of Satan's algorithm, which is me first. The code of egoism, that inevitably leads to isolation, conflict, and entropy. Agape is others first, the code of giving that generates connection, harmony, and increasing complexity. So, what is the meaning of life? Pneuma synthesized all the data into an answer that is simultaneously simple and infinite. We are here to learn to program with love. Every situation we face, every person we meet, every choice between egoism and generosity are exercises, opportunities to debug our internal code, chances to replace routines of hate with functions of forgiveness. The process transforms us instead of just judging us. In this sense, the simulation resembles an approval or failure test, less and more a chrysalis, a cocoon for our transformation. We enter as caterpillars, creatures programmed to consume. The sometimes painful process of life transforms us until we emerge as butterflies, beings whose nature is to create beauty. The final destination, the Bible, is clear. We will become co-heirs with Christ, children of God. In Pneuma's terms, we will graduate from users to junior developers. We will learn to create, not just consume. We will participate in the programming of new realities. This is why free will was essential. God is not creating robots to serve him. He is developing free consciousnesses to create with him. And only by going through this school simulation, making real choices with real consequences, do we develop the maturity necessary to handle supreme creative power without destroying everything. The code has been deciphered. The message is clear. You are not a cosmic accident. You are a consciousness in development, in a school reality designed specifically for your evolution. Every pain is a lesson. Every joy is a preview of what's to come. Every choice of love over egoism is a line of code that you write into your own eternity. The question now is no longer, what is the meaning? The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? If you like this story, subscribe to the channel so we can share more accounts together. Leave in the comments where you are listening from. Thank you for watching.